For better picture quality, adjust tracking control on your VCR.
This was our world 64 million years ago. The central plains of North America were underwater. Here, near the edge of the sea, it's a subtropical swamp. This is the late Cretaceous period, the time before man, although some early mammals managed to eke out an existence. They survived by eating insects, living furtively, and staying out of the way, for this is the age of the dinosaur. Some of these reptiles, like Ornithomimus, are only 7 feet tall, but their domination of the environment effectively blocks the mammal's chance for widespread development. Ornithomimus may have terrified the unwary mammals, but even for him there was danger. There was Tyrannosaur. Ankylosaur, the armored lizard, was normally peaceful, but able to fight off all comers. Not all dinosaurs were meat-eaters. The peaceful Edmontosaurs were vegetarians. They probably lived communally and posed no threat to the other inhabitants of the prehistoric world. The duck-billed Edmontosaurs had better things to do than fight. Triceratops. Each egg was almost a foot long, but their chances of survival were slim. No one is absolutely sure what forces led to the extinction of the dinosaur. All we know is that about 64 million years ago they died out. With the death of the huge reptiles, the way was now open for mammals. And it would be mammals, not dinosaurs, who would prove to be the survivors after all.
Meet the DCX, Delta Clipper Experimental, a rocket for the people, a revolutionary approach to lowering launch costs, which takes us back to the future of spaceflight, an entirely new philosophy in the development of launch technology. The Delta Clipper team has taken the common sense, tried and true approach of commercial aviation and applied it for the first time to rockets. In early rocket designs, the mass of the equipment and propellant needed to fly long distances was found to be too high. Since the cost of the vehicle was less important than delivering its payload on what was usually a one-way trip, it was decided to throw away those parts of the rocket no longer being used in the flight, progressively making it lighter as it flew towards its target. This is the type of traditional multi-stage vehicle we currently use. Imagine what an airline ticket would cost if each trip started out with an entire plane and ended with only the passenger cabin, and then was rebuilt for the return flight only to be mostly thrown away again. The costs would forever keep flying beyond the grasp of all but a few. That's the situation we face today. We know from experience that we should maintain a mixed fleet of launch capability. But if the goal of our space program is a dramatic reduction in the cost of launching payloads, then it's also time for the next step, a reusable rocket system that operates as routinely as today's military and commercial aircraft. This is why the DCX single-stage rocket is so important. In 1990, the Defense Department selected 4 of the nation's leading aerospace contractors to conduct a Phase 1 feasibility study of the single-stage-to-orbit concept based on available computer, propulsion, and materials technologies. The study's mandate was to answer 3 main questions. Can it be done? Can it be done quickly? And can it be done cheaply? After careful studies by the best minds at each firm, all 4 agreed. The answer to all 3 questions was yes. Single stage to orbit will work. Taking a page from aircraft development programs, Phase 2 of the project was to rapidly prototype X vehicles of increasing size and performance. This aircraft style of development, in which a series of test vehicles are repeatedly flown to incrementally push the envelope of a concept, had never been applied to rockets. First, a 1/3 scale vehicle called DCX would be built to prove the concept and to conduct low-speed flight and maneuvering tests. Next, if funding is made available, will come a vehicle twice the size of the DCX, which will obtain speeds well into the hypersonic range. This vehicle will support commercial and military testing and be our next step on the way to the single-stage-to-orbit fleet, which will be the heart of our 21st century launch industry. In 1991, McDonnell Douglas's Delta Clipper vertical takeoff and landing design was selected for Phase 2, designated the Single Stage Rocket Technology Program, SSRT, to demonstrate technology availability of reusable rocket systems. A suborbital demonstrator was ordered, and an industry team made up of some of the world's top aerospace companies was formed to take on the challenge. These companies, representing some of the best capabilities in the field, contributed vital elements of the program. They too believe that single-stage rocket technology has arrived. In August 1991, at McDonnell Douglas's facility in Huntington Beach, California, the new team was assembled. In keeping with the project's revolutionary nature, a new rapid prototyping environment was created. This X designation and the streamlined project structure provided the right environment for success. Since one of the goals of the project was to incorporate aircraft-like systems wherever possible, top engineers and designers from the successful MD-11 airliner the F-15, the F-18, and the AV-8B Harrier projects were brought in to work together with our rocket engineering staff. Overcoming dozens of technical hurdles, borrowing technology from a wide variety of space, aircraft, and other fields, and creating many new and innovative solutions to the single-stage challenge, the DCX team drove forward to realize their vision, and by early 1993, the vehicle was completed. While the vehicle was being built, a mini spaceport was constructed in White Sands, New Mexico. The spaceport contains everything needed for the DCX flight testing, including maintenance and service technicians required to turn the vehicle around after each flight. The entire DCX flight support team numbers about 35 people. In this small operations van, which is very similar to that planned for the full-size Delta Clipper, only 3 people will be required to launch and fly the vehicle using Macintosh or Windows-like computer interfaces. For its first flight, the DCX will take off and hover just above the ground as its systems are verified. Then, it will perform a soft touchdown on its landing gear. Next, it will be flown to higher altitudes and faster speeds in both still and windy conditions, where it will demonstrate its aerodynamic performance. Then, it will be flown to several thousand feet, where it will be ordered to pitch over into its landing approach flight path. Next, it will demonstrate its critical rotation maneuver. Finally, using its onboard vehicle management system with its global positioning receiver, the DCX will perform a precision soft landing within 20 feet of its designated touchdown site. In a world ever more conscious of the environment, McDonnell Douglas is proud of the fact that the hydrogen and oxygen propellants used in our DCX will make the Delta Clipper the world's environmentally cleanest spaceship, as its exhaust will be nothing more than water vapor. The Delta Clipper single-stage rocket concept is indeed the door to space for America. Single-stage rocket research bodes a revolution in spaceflight, which will not only give our defenders the technology for global reach, but will pave the way for a whole new generation of scientists, students, and commercial researchers to enjoy unprecedented opportunities for research and exploration. The DCX is as common sense an idea as America itself. This year, the McDonnell Douglas Delta Clipper team will change the world. Single-stage rockets have arrived. DCX, the future is now.
iron men in wooden ships. A description of heroism never more apt is when applied to those who braved the Arctic. Up to the early part of the 20th century, the single largest focus of Arctic exploration was the Northwest Passage. For over 300 years, European explorers conceived the passage to be a route to the rich markets of the Orient. By 1800, it was realized that the passage was too treacherous to serve as an economic east-west thoroughfare. But Britain pressed onward, moving ever deeper into unknown territory. By the 1840s, the push to complete the charting of the Northwest Passage had become a national obsession, as powerful as that of a century later, when the world would turn its adventure-starved eyes to the moon. Here on Beechey Island, at the upper reaches of the passage, are the graves of 3 ordinary sailors, doomed by extraordinary circumstances. Buried deep within the permafrost, their coffins are time capsules, waiting to give up their secrets of another age. To modern-day scientific explorers, these time capsules are a window into the lives and deaths of men who challenged the Arctic, and to a compelling mystery, forever frozen in time. In May of 1845, the British Admiralty commissioned the 58th and hopefully final charting of the Northwest Passage. The naval ships HMS Erebus and Terror were equipped with bows of reinforced iron, powered with converted locomotive engines, and crewed by 129 men. Sir John Franklin was, at 59, a veteran of 2 overland expeditions in the North American Arctic. Franklin captained HMS Erebus and commanded the entire expedition. James Fitzjames served as the Erebus' second-in-command. Francis Crozier was captain of the Erebus' sister ship, HMS Terror. The Franklin expedition was last seen 2 months after departure, moving into Lancaster Sound. According to a recovered document, the Erebus and Terror entered the Arctic archipelago through Lancaster Sound, circumnavigated Cornwallis Island, and wintered off Beechey Island. In early summer of 1846, Franklin steered his ships in a southwesterly direction toward King William Island. Since his maps indicated that King William was a peninsula attached on the eastern side, Franklin stayed to the west. By September of 1846, the 2 vessels were hopelessly entrapped in pack ice, 15 miles from King William Island. There was to be no spring thaw that year, nor the next. In June of 1847, at the age of 61, Sir John Franklin died. By the 22nd of April, 1848, 8 other officers and 15 crewmen were dead. 105 desperate survivors fled the ships, dragging a lifeboat laden with prayer books, cutlery, curtain rods, plates, even a writing desk. The sailors trekked down the coast of King William Island, hoping to make their escape to a Hudson's Bay post 1,000 miles to the south. The death march lasted from spring to winter. In their last extremities, some fed on the bodies of dead comrades. Unwittingly, the last of the Franklin crew did succeed in traversing the final stretch of the Northwest Passage. Their legacy, a pathetic trail of bones that ended on Adelaide Peninsula on the south coast of Simpson Strait, known today as Starvation Cove. Why did 24 men die before the ships were deserted? And why would the survivors drag heavy, useless cargo on a southward 1,000-mile trek when they knew that well-stocked whaling ships frequented the north end of the passage? Dr. Owen Beatty is well known in Canada for his work in forensic anthropology. His fascination with the Franklin mystery has resulted in several trips to the high Arctic, beginning with a 1981 trip to King William Island to collect bone samples.
This place is often referred to as Crozier's Landing, and what this represents is the point on King William Island where the 105 surviving Franklin crewmen congregated after abandoning the ships, which were located 5 leagues north-northwest of here in late April of 1848. And what we have behind me here is their campsite. It's made up of around 13 tent circles, and if you walk around this site today, you can find scattered over the site a lot of artifacts from that time period, 1848. Very little is left, but you can see throughout the structure, you can see bone, metal, and wood.
All the forlorn remnants were interesting to Dr. Beatty, but to apply his specialty, he required human bone. Beatty brought a variety of skeletal samples back to his lab in Edmonton and began a series of forensic examinations into their biological, physical, and chemical composition.
The biological information we're looking for is evidence of health, disease, and other evidence for bone alterations. But there's another perspective to look at in bone material like this, and that's what makes up the bone. And we submitted small bone fragments for trace element analysis. And the results initially were very interesting to me, but I didn't pick up on perhaps the possible significance. And the results related to, among other elements that are present in the bone, and is the presence of lead. And in the one Franklin individual, the lead levels were in the order of 220 to 230 parts per million. And in comparison, the Inuit materials from, remember, the same time period are about 1/10 the amount. And the thoughts were multiple here. Was this something that reflected the lead exposures of this one individual, or could it have been a more expansive problem that may have been shared by some of the other expedition members?
Dr. Beatty's suspicion that lead poisoning may have contributed to the demise of the Franklin expedition sprang from a knowledge of what lead can do to the body and mind. Paralysis of the muscles, excruciating pain in the limbs, anorexia, colic, neuroses, disorientation, inflammation of the nerves or brain. Was it possible that madness and the inability to judge time and space could have made 1,000 miles seem a short distance, or turned ornate, inedible objects into reasonable cargo for a desperate journey? It had long been known that there were 3 graves on Beechey Island. In 1984, Dr. Beatty and his scientific team traveled to Beechey to investigate one of the graves, that of Petty Officer John Torrington of HMS Terror. The findings were staggering. John Torrington's body was almost perfectly preserved. The samples taken revealed that the body's lead levels, though not as high as that in the bones of the King William sailor, were still 5 times higher than the Inuit bones from the same time period. Could it be that the lead intake continued over the course of the expedition, slowly poisoning the unwary seamen? If so, where was the lead coming from? Dr. Beatty's hypothesis about lead poisoning was rapidly taking shape, but the samples were too limited to be conclusive. Beatty felt his findings warranted a return to Beechey Island and a detailed investigation and exhumation of the 2 remaining bodies.
For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one warm line through a land so passage. Westward from the Davis Strait is there 'twas said to lie the sea route to the Orient, for which so many died, seeking gold and glory, leaving weathered, broken bones, and a long forgotten lonely cairn of stones. Ah, for just one time I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one.
You want to roll back a little bit now? I want to make sure we get the lateral knee on there.
Dr. Notman is anxious to complete his x-rays as quickly as possible.
At least his limbs are flexible. He seems fairly stable, too.
Well,
Just let go.
all I need is something underneath this top part.
Here.
As he proceeds, the x-rays are clear and easily understandable, primarily because the body is much freer of internal ice and was not autopsied after death. Damage to one side of the body arouses suspicions that it may have been gnawed by rats, not surprising at a time when rats on sailing ships were almost as prevalent as sailors.
Exposing. Oh, the picture over here on the left is a shot of the left knee. Over here, these two skull x-rays really show a big difference between Hartnell on the right and Brain on the left. We had a great deal of difficulty with Hartnell's skull initially because we could not penetrate the amount of ice that was inside. It's just one dense solid block of ice. With Brain, on the other hand, we could penetrate the skull and show the bony details almost immediately. This is an excellent technical picture. We'll be able to analyze that in greater detail under appropriate lighting conditions.
Again, this is absolutely standard autopsy technique. There's nothing new and exciting about it.
These are the same characteristics as Hartnell's.
Characteristic I was seeing on Hartnell's was calcification.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a sensation. You feel it. And these ones don't feel particularly hard to. I would be actually somewhat surprised if he didn't have tuberculosis.
During the process of collection, a sample of intestinal flora was removed from William Brain's intestines. This bacteria, known as Clostridia, was later cultured successfully under laboratory conditions. Brain's stomach is devoid of food. Like Hartnell, his state of emaciation also conforms with high lead intake, although nothing conclusive can be determined until all trace element data is analyzed under laboratory conditions. While the plaque attached to Brain's coffin is a remarkable artifact, it too will be reburied. Eric Damjar contents himself with detailed tracings of its shape and engraving. William Brain is accorded the same respect in his reburial as John Hartnell. Born in Oak Hill, Somerset, William Brain was married in Greenwich. No record has been found of children from Brain's marriage, nor have any confirmed descendants come forward. His headboard epitaph was even sterner than that of Hartnell. It reads, "Choose ye this day whom ye shall serve." Once the coffin has been covered, the research team begins the process of returning the gravesite to its original condition. When the stones and gravel have been relocated, there will be little sign of modern interference. Over the course of the clinical analysis of the tissue samples, scientists determined that both men suffered from severe tuberculosis and that the probable cause of death was pneumonia. The preliminary lead analysis conducted by Walt Cole was much as expected. The levels of lead found in the bone of John Hartnell, as well as that of William Brain, were consistent with Beattie's findings in the case of Petty Officer John Torrington, levels 3 to 4 times higher than in normal, modern human bone. Hair samples indicated lead levels ranging from 20 to 90 times the current scientific standard.
What is remarkable about this historical event is that you can apply the same forensic techniques to looking at unanswered historical problems as we do in looking at the modern forensic problems, in supplementing the work of historians and archaeologists with physical evidence that can support or suggest re-looking at events in the past. Franklin expedition is one of these, where there was a mass disaster. It is a forensic problem in trying to determine the events that led to the disaster. And here's where the factor of lead comes in. That the lead itself has variable effects on the body as well as the mind. Even very subtle effects on the mind could have very important results. We just look at the decision-making process of the officers. We should look seriously at the implications of lead on the decision-making process.
There can be little doubt that the cumulative effects of lead contaminating the food supply contributed to the final tragedy of the Franklin expedition. But was this a singular case? There have been many unexplained deaths, disappearances, even stories of madness on Arctic explorations before and after Franklin's time. The hostile environment and vast distances of the Arctic would account for most of these incidents. But Dr. Beattie's investigation begs the question, could tinned food supplies have been involved in other nautical tragedies? Food supplies meant to sustain life, but carrying instead the seeds of disaster for iron men in wooden ships.
With 100 seamen he sailed away to the frozen ocean in the month of May, to seek that passage around the pole where we poor sailors do sometimes go. In Baffin's Bay where the whalefish blow, the fate of Franklin no man may know. The fate of Franklin no tongue can tell, where Franklin and his sailors dwell.
Life Unlimited Foundation seeks to instill a love for animals with education and through environmental awareness.
On land and underwater, sportsman and photographer Bill Porter with son John and family invite you all to join them at a spot in the country where we hope to see some wildlife still run free. We'll go hunting, climbing, fishing, diving, see things that help to set the spirit free. We might take some of the surplus that the good Lord has provided, always mindful of the sportsman's creed. so the wildlife we all love remains unlimited. Oh, Bill and Rose and Little John, who's grown to be a man, will show you through a camera's eye wonders of the land. You might camp with them by mountain streams or run barefoot in the sand. But wherever you go, recall the creed, keep the wildlife unlimited.
Not so very far away, in a place we would all love to live in, lives a man in tune with nature. A man who is tolerated by the wild ones. He lives in the big woods with them. He makes no pets, just observes and enjoys.
For a sportsman's more than just a hunter or a fisherman. There's things to see to all the mind of many a mortal man. From the way the wild protect their young to canyons carved in sand. Oh, don't take them all as you recall. We're for wildlife unlimited.
The old man of the woods has told me a lot of stories and taught me a lot about how to live in harmony with the wild ones. Like this story about Thunder, the black wolf. The first time he ever saw the black wolf, it was threatening to rain. Thunderheads were rolling in, and the earth trembled with their mighty roar. Lightning flashed across the sky. And there she was, as black as night, fighting with that log, with all the fury of the storm. And so she got her name, Thunder. Probably it was only his imagination, but it seemed like every time he saw her after that, he could hear the thunder roll. The old man always took the time to stop and examine the flowers. He liked all of them, from the bouncing beds to the lobellas. He found that the lobellas down by the creek banks were more flowered out this time of year. What a place to be. The second time he saw her, it was about to storm again. This time she was hunting in an old meadow that was growing up in young pines and briars. and the colors stood out so bright just before the storm. He told me about the many times that he had seen her high in the hills, under the overhanging rocks, and always hunting. One time she almost came up to him, but not quite. Many times he had seen her on the top of Standing Rock, as he called it, or on a nearby ledge, surveying her kingdom like a queen from her tower. There were also other wolves in the area, like the pack of gray timber wolves. The old man didn't see much of them, unless he passed by their den in the spring. Wolves live in packs far from civilization and are very rarely seen at all, so the old man always considered this an exceptional treat. One summer day, two of the timber wolf cubs were trying out their new hunting skills down by the cold trout stream. One hot, sunny afternoon, more tired than hungry, the old man fell asleep in the warm afternoon sun and was totally unaware of the guest that dropped in for lunch. One time that really stands out in my mind is the time the Thunder was hunting for pheasants. Down along the edge of the woods, where the briars grew out into the grassy fields. The animals were not as wary of the old man as other people, so they came in real close to him, like the time he had been out on a sunny but cold winter day, and the wind had made it feel a lot colder. So the old man made a fire on the banks of a small frozen lake. It wasn't long until he noticed a deer standing off to his left. just watching the fox and him. The fox he knew as Swamp Fox came in for a closer look at the fire, then found the remains of a dead deer. The Swamp Fox was so excited, but then hurried off to get her mate. It was after they had returned that the old man had a chance to see two foxes fight. An unusual fight, to say the least. The old man had watched the Swamp Fox after a squirrel in a stump. He called her Swamp Fox because almost every time he saw her, she was down by the swamp or on the edge of a lake. The day by the fire, the deer and the fox all but ignored each other. But on a different day, in a different place, it was a different story. The old man seen thunder in the winter too. One time he was rubbing on a tree that had fell down. Wolves do this, rub the scent of something else on themselves to hide the scent of their own odor from their prey. Well, this time he didn't need to hide it, for under the tree was the remains of a deer Thunder had returned to eat more of. Once in a while, when the snow wasn't too deep, or when he just had an urge to do so, the old man would go back up to Stand Rock. And yes, once in a while, there he'd see Thunder at her favorite spot, surveying her kingdom. One cold winter day, the old man started out early to check on a bear den he had seen earlier. He was anxious to see if the sow inside had had her cubs, and just how many. There she was, snug inside, and there were the cubs. One, two of them she had. It would be a happy walk home. But things change, and this time it was the weather. Before long, the wind had picked up, and it had started to snow. A complete whiteout. The old man knew he must keep on moving. But even as experienced as he was, he knew he'd be lucky to find his way out. Then he thought he heard the cry of a wolf. It was definitely the cry of a wolf. Wolves don't usually howl in a snowstorm, but the old man headed for the sound anyway. He knew the wolf would be headed for cover too. He soon found the tracks and hurried along them. They'd soon be blown in if he didn't keep up. After a while, he recognized the area. It was the clearing by his cabin. Had it been luck? Or had it been thunder helping out an old friend? We'll never know for sure, but I know one old man that still loves the sound of thunder. There are many other stories centering around the Old Man of the Woods available. Victory the Bear has the old man recalling a story about how he helped the baby bear, and the adult bear helped him in return. Loon Island is a place of beauty and mystic wonders. A smallmouth bass called Old Gertrude follows the nesting and raising habits of the young. Stag, the story of a white-tailed buck, is all about the yearly development of the white-tailed deer. I'd like to give a special thanks to Rose Porter for all of her help and support, as well as her camera work, and to John Porter, tape operations, and many hours of assistance in our day-to-day work. I'm wildlife photographer Bill Porter, and I'll take you there, and my Jeep takes me there. Promotional consideration to the American Airlines, where there is something special in the air.
For a sportsman's more than just a hunter or a fisherman. There's things to see to all the mind of many a mortal man. From the way the wild protect their young to canyons carved in sand. Oh, don't take them all as you recall. We're for Wildlife Unlimited. Yes, Bill and Rose and little John, who's grown to be a man, will show you through a camera's eye wonders of the land. You might camp with them by mountain streams or run barefoot in the sand. But wherever you go, recall the creed. Keep the wildlife unlimited. Wherever you go, recall that creed. Keep the wildlife unlimited.
The following program contains rare footage of both an historic and scientific nature. Some has been preserved in archives, while other footage has been transmitted from deep space probes, such as NASA's Voyager 1 and 2 satellites. Because of the unique and spectacular nature of this footage, the producers have chosen to leave this footage unaltered in order to give the viewer an accurate and first-hand look at these remarkable scenes.
Look into the delicate living ceiling that covers our planet and take an amazing journey into space and time. Day or night, you see fascinating evidence of places and times so far removed from planet Earth that they're virtually impossible for us Earthlings to comprehend. We know that light travels at 186,000 miles per second, nearly 10 million times faster than the fastest car. Yet, when we look at our own sun, we are in fact seeing light that took 8 minutes to reach us. When we look at the light of Proxima Centauri, the star nearest our sun, we see light that began its journey to Earth more than 4 years ago. Perhaps the farthest object that can be seen with the naked human eye is the brightest light in the constellation Andromeda. When we look at the Andromeda Galaxy, we are seeing light that spent nearly 2 million years on its journey to Earth. Man has never been satisfied with his ability to see into space. He has constantly sought to build bigger, more powerful telescopes, to put more and more satellites into space, and even to travel there himself. Modern man has always been proud of his ability to reach farther and farther beyond his planet. And with today's deep space probes and space-borne telescopes, he can now solve some of the oldest mysteries of the cosmos. Yet the only reason modern man can see so far into the depths of space is because he's standing firmly on the shoulders of the thousands of brave and curious men and women who came before him. For centuries, pioneers of astronomy and space travel have been risking their lives and reputations to sift the facts about our cosmos from the superstitions. These pioneers have ranged from ancient artists and philosophers to scientists and mathematicians. They have been early Greeks poring over hand-drawn charts to modern American astronauts stuffed into bulky spacesuits walking on the face of the moon.
Who was the first man to try for a space flight? Ah, that's right. Who? Wan Hu. According to ancient accounts, this Ming Dynasty astronaut fitted his bamboo spacecraft with all the black powder fire rockets it would hold. And when the rockets were ignited by a platoon of pigtailed technicians, Wan Hu was converted gloriously from the living to legend.
The earliest space visionaries sacrificed much to understand the mysteries outside the portals of planet Earth. Early man looked into the sky with awe and reverence and tried to make sense of the unknowable. History is strewn with evidence of man's feeble attempts to understand the worlds around him. There are ancient pyramids, altars and temples to the stars. There are dramatic and mysterious objects like the huge upright stones at Stonehenge near Salisbury, England. This 4,000 to 5,000 year old monument consists of 4 concentric circles of huge rock pillars. The outermost ring is about 100 feet in diameter. The entire structure is surrounded by a 5-foot wide ditch. The site has been frequently desecrated and violated over the centuries. The ancient Romans tore down a number of the huge buttress stones and more recently stonemasons quarried many of the huge rocks. But despite the violence, the monument remains a place where the imagination can soar. No one truly knows the exact purpose of the mysterious structure. No one knows why early builders decided to move these enormous stones long before wheels, cranes, or hydraulics to the Salisbury Plain. But it is apparent the structure is part of man's efforts to understand the dome of the sky. Near the main group of Stonehenge pillars stands a solitary rock. This so-called heel stone marks a sight line that once a year leads directly to the rising sun. This particular sunrise comes on the longest day of the year, the so-called solstice. It's not difficult to see these upright stones as an attempt to harness the heavens. They could have served as an early calendar, helping man predict the seasons, helping him put his difficult life into some kind of order. These Stonehenge builders and other of our ancestors, all now long dead, worked hard and risked much to provide us with truths about the working of the universe. Yet modern man's inflated ego frequently causes him to forget the golden scientific legacy that he's building on. In our modern age, with all the high technology and scientific achievements, it's easy to sneer at the way our forefathers were so often fooled about the heavens. It's true that the years haven't been kind to many of the most widely held theories and speculations of past centuries. Beliefs once accepted as truth now seem ridiculous when held up to the light of modern science. When viewed through the telescope of time, it's hard to believe our ancestors could have been so frequently wrong about some very obvious truths. Early astronomers once believed the Earth was flat, that the planets and the sun orbited the Earth, and that the cosmos was infinite, without a beginning or an end. But keep in mind that early man's attempts to harness the universe were made even more complicated by the fact he was working with such crude tools. Early Greeks actually laid the groundwork for modern astronomy, without telescopes or rocket power or computers. They attempted to understand deep space using only the naked human eye.
We have a go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
And we have liftoff of America's first space shuttle. And the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Farewell program. Go. Roger, roll.
Today's space program actually began when the ancient Greeks looked into a night sky filled with lights and flashes and began to notice that some of the lights were moving. They also noticed that some of the lights twinkled while others were constant. We now know that the steady lights are planets. The twinkling lights are faraway stars whose light is being altered and bent as it travels through Earth's atmosphere. The Greeks also noticed that the twinkling lights appeared to stay in one place, while the constant lights moved in a predictable path across the sky. That realization started an intellectual journey that continues to this day. We now know that the 5 moving lights are the 5 planets closest to Earth. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Because of the relative nearness of the planets, early astronomers could make out the movement. The stars were also moving around the galaxy, but because of the enormous distances involved, the human eye couldn't detect the change. The early Greeks were obsessed with these moving pinpoints of light that they labeled wandering stars. The name planet actually comes from the Greek word for wandering. Using their mathematical talents, the Greeks began trying to determine where the planets were moving. The early scientists charted a circular path governed by some common central point. The Greeks loved order and clean, clear answers to complex questions. So their scientists assumed the planetary paths were perfect circles. And they concluded that the central point of all this movement was Earth. In about the 2nd century A.D., Claudius Ptolemy, a respected Greek astronomer living in Egypt, devised a complex system that would allow the existing planet orbits to actually move around the Earth. Ptolemy believed the solar system lined up like this. First the Earth, then the Moon, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and finally Saturn. This Ptolemaic system is ridiculed today, but it was widely accepted as truth for nearly 1,000 years. Only a few brave souls openly disputed Ptolemy's version of the mechanics of the solar system, because church leaders of the day believed the Ptolemaic system followed biblical principles. The scientific community ignored a host of clear signs that Ptolemy was wrong. For instance, it was plain to see that light from nearby planets varied in intensity. This should have been a clear sign that the distance between Earth and the planets changed dramatically during their orbits, indicating that the Earth was also moving in an orbit of its own. Ptolemy's errors survived a long, intellectually stagnant period in man's history that is often referred to as the Dark Ages. This era of intellectual and religious persecution lasted until the 15th century. Some of the credit for bringing light to the Dark Ages has to go to a young Polish astronomer who came to his study of the heavens with a curious and open mind. Nikolai Copernicus was an educated and sophisticated young man. A doctor who also studied for a career in the church, Copernicus began to spot the weaknesses in the Ptolemaic system. Scanning and charting the skies, still working without a telescope, Copernicus saw that the solar system, including the Earth, most likely revolved around the sun's center of gravity. After a lifetime of research and challenging the beliefs of the past, Copernicus developed many of the views of the solar system that are still held today. He managed to place the planets in the proper order and quickly saw the true center of the solar system was the sun and not the Earth. It is said that it was on his deathbed that Copernicus saw the first copies of his book on the revolutions of the heavenly orbs, which laid the groundwork for much of the future progress in understanding space. Building on Copernicus' foundation, future astronomers like Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton began to get a firmer grip on the workings of space. Copernicus had continued to see the planetary orbits as a series of perfect circles. While Kepler was studying Mars, he noticed that things weren't as clean as all that. He saw that the true orbits were elliptical in shape. Newton found the reason for this unusual path. He discovered that the pressure from the core of heavenly bodies gave them an attractive force that we now know as gravity. The sun's enormous gravitational pull constantly tugged at the planets in our solar system. This pressure explained the elliptical orbits. The planets tested the sun's gravitational pressure in the farthest part of their orbit, only to be pulled back to the sun in the closest part of their path. Interestingly, both Kepler and Newton first came to their revolutionary ideas in a flash of fortuitous brilliance. It is said that Kepler's initial understanding of elliptical orbits first came to him in a dream. Newton, on the other hand, claimed that he began to grasp the laws of gravity when an apple fell from a tree and bounced off his head. Man's direct interaction with space shifted into a new gear in 1564, when Galileo Galilei was born in Italy. In 1609, Galileo took the invention of a spectacle maker in Flanders and began turning it toward the heavens. Man had his first true glimpse of space. But just gazing into space was never enough. Man has long been dreaming of taking his show on the road, of actually seeing these mysteries for himself, of actually traveling into space. As early as the 2nd century AD, wishful fiction began to emerge about man soaring beyond Earth. Some early Greek writings told of a voyage to the moon on a ship launched by a waterspout. An English bishop named Francis Goodwin wrote in 1683 of an imaginary trip to the moon in a craft pulled by a flock of geese. One of the first true space visionaries was the 19th century French writer Jules Verne. In his plausible tale From the Earth to the Moon, which was written in 1865, he shot several space travelers out of a giant space gun, or cannon. Interestingly, the launch was made from Florida, not far from one of the homes of the American space program, Cape Canaveral. While a human couldn't have survived the trauma of the cannon launching Verne described, the French dreamer was still moving man closer and closer to the truth of space travel. Actually, Verne's rare understanding of what the future held revealed itself in a number of other areas. In 1994, an unpublished Verne manuscript was discovered in a trunk in the garage of his great-grandson. The story, written in 1863, predicted the development of fax machines, railways, automobiles, and the electric chair to replace the guillotine. Verne's writings also influenced one of the pioneers of rocketry, Russian Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. Tsiolkovsky had very little formal education and had been deaf from childhood. He was something of a rocket hobbyist, frequently experimenting with a technology that had been considered only for children's toys and occasionally as weapons of war. After reading Verne, Tsiolkovsky concluded that rockets could actually be used to take payloads, even men, into space. Working completely independent of Tsiolkovsky, American Robert Goddard was coming to similar conclusions. It was a chilly New England morning in March of 1926 when Robert Goddard turned the heat up on the race to space. Goddard was a college professor in Worcester, Massachusetts, who had decided years before that he could design a vehicle capable of flying to the moon. While men like Tsiolkovsky generally just developed theories about space travel, Goddard actually built and flew rockets. On this day, he was launching a new rocket in a field near the home of his Aunt Effie. This rocket was the first to use liquid fuel instead of a dry propellant like gunpowder. Goddard's mixture of liquid oxygen and gasoline proved to be the right concoction. The small rocket stayed aloft for 12.5 seconds, and in that short time, it opened the door a crack on space travel. Goddard's space flight attracted much favorable publicity, although the noise and fire did frighten some residents of the area. But his early efforts didn't get a lot of support. So-called experts and the bureaucrats in the scientific community were loudly critical of Goddard's efforts. There was even a famous editorial in the New York Times that accused Goddard of being ignorant of the most elementary rules of physics. Goddard was right, the Times was wrong. Part of the controversy that swirled around the work of both Tsiolkovsky and Goddard and other pioneers of rocket flight was a belief that rocket propulsion wouldn't work in the vacuum of free space. Many scientists of that day believed that burning rocket fuel required the opposite reaction of the Earth's atmosphere to produce the force needed to push a rocket into space. Goddard and Tsiolkovsky saw that this wasn't true. As long as they took along the oxygen needed to produce combustion, a rocket would work perfectly well in space. That realization freed scientists to contemplate space voyages that could maneuver around the heavens. Spacecraft of this period took a fairly sinister turn as the work of several German rocket engineers was added to the body of knowledge on the subject. The Germans had developed a liquid-fueled rocket called the V-2 during World War II. While not extremely accurate, the V-2 was frightening and did some terrible damage to London during the final stages of the war. Post-war research became a battle as the United States and Soviet Union began battling to move the fastest and the farthest into space. Sputnik 1 broke through the Earth's atmosphere in October of 1957. It was a tiny ball weighing less than 100 kilograms and carried only a weak radio transmitter. Sputnik's name came from the Russian word for fellow traveler, and the tiny satellite caught the world by surprise and storm. There are millions of people who remember the day Sputnik was launched, and many who insist they actually saw the satellite flying through the air. Their memories are either overheated, or they're actually remembering the sight of parts of the rocket that pushed Sputnik into space. The actual satellite was far too small to be seen with the naked eye. Millions of people were able to hear the beeping radio signal. The Russians quickly followed up with a second Sputnik, which carried the first living thing to break the barrier into space, a small female dog named Laika. Again, the world could listen in on the Soviet adventure. Shortwave radio owners could often hear the dog's heartbeat as she circled the globe. The dog's life in space was a short one. She appeared to have few problems with the launch or even the weightlessness of space, but died in about a week when her air supply ran out. In the first truly cosmic funeral in modern history, poor little Laika's body was cremated as Sputnik 2 burned to a cinder, re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. The American space program wasn't overly concerned about the initial Sputnik shot. It was, after all, a small ball of metal that orbited briefly. The second Sputnik was a different story. Sputnik 2 weighed more than half of a ton, included 2 separate chambers, and it contained a legitimate life support system for Laika. The Americans realized that the Russians must have rocket technology well beyond what the U.S. was capable of producing. The shot prompted much hysteria in the U.S. as politicians and space experts warned that space vehicles could be used for military purposes. The U.S. pinned its hopes on its Vanguard rocket and scheduled a test shot in December of 1957. The pressure was heavy on that first flight, apparently too heavy. Just 1 second after liftoff, the Vanguard rocket lost power and ended up in a tremendous fireball. The press labeled the effort Kaputnik. America was finally successful with its Explorer 1 in January of 1958, but it was clear the U.S. significantly trailed Russia in the space race. In May of 1961, newly elected President John F. Kennedy decided to put new stress on the space program and announced in a joint session of Congress that the U.S. was about to enter a formal race with the Soviet Union to see which country could be the first to reach the moon.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. Now it is time to take longer strides, time for a great new American enterprise, time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
This race became an incredible milestone in human history. It took man beyond his tiny backwater planet into the huge universe that lies outside Earth's portals. It gave man first entry into worlds previously only dreamed of. Mankind had questioned what lay beyond Earth's atmosphere. Speculation about life in our solar system has long concentrated on the planet Mars. While the galaxy is packed with all types of heavenly bodies, planets, moons, black holes, quarks, quasars, comets, and meteorites, sometime in our history, the small planet Mars was singled out as the most likely home of intelligent life. Perhaps Mars became the focus of all these questions in the Victorian era, when astronomers first began to get clear views of the Martian surface. It was obvious the planet had polar ice caps and what appeared to be canals that could be bringing water to arid areas. At some time in the more recent past, man for some reason decided that if there were Martians, they must be creatures bent on invading Earth to steal water or food, or to kill or enslave humans. One of the most infamous of Martian attacks occurred in the imaginations of British author H.G. Wells and American actor and director Orson Welles. The British Wells wrote the paperback potboiler, The War of the Worlds, in 1898. The book prompted a number of literary knockoffs, plays, television productions, and a 1953 Paramount film that won an Academy Award for special effects. But it also spawned a 1938 radio play that revealed just how frightening and real the threat of an extraterrestrial invasion was in the human mind. Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. Thus began Wells' radio play. The imaginary landing was at the small town of Grover's Mills, New Jersey, and the bug-like Martians came to Earth with trouble on their minds.
We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, here I am. Wait a minute, something's happening. There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. Lord, they're turning into flames.
The Martians were indescribable, the imaginary newscaster told us. They had eyes that are black and gleam like a serpent. The mouth is V-shaped, with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. More than 1 million people all across the U.S. were panicked by the realistic-sounding report. And before they realized the coincidence that this was all happening the day before Halloween, many listeners fled their homes. Some cried and prayed in the streets. There were even a few claims of related suicides. It was so real to a few people they swore to have seen the fires of the alien attack in the distance. Mankind began looking into the centuries of speculation about extraterrestrial life in 1959, when the Russians won another leg of the space battle, sending their 3 Lunik spacecraft to the moon. Each craft sent back some data about the moon, but none of the information gave any hopes life would be found there. The Soviets built on these successes by being the first to send a man into space. In April of 1961, a 27-year-old pilot named Yuri Gagarin took a short, graceful journey into space. His Vostok 1 spacecraft took a single orbit around the Earth as Gagarin looked through his craft window and described the beauty of the Earth. He stayed aloft only 108 minutes before re-entering the atmosphere and parachuting to Earth. Three weeks later, the first American broke the bonds of Earth as Alan Shepard and his Freedom 7 spacecraft went on a journey of slightly more than 15 minutes.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
The Americans followed up the same year with their first orbiting flight, when an astronaut who later became a U.S. Senator, John Glenn, took a 5-hour flight around the Earth.
I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous. Roger. Understand go for at least 7 orbits.
What followed was a difficult period for both space programs. The Americans had a tragic launch pad fire in 1967 during a practice run. 3 astronauts were killed. The Russians lost several of their lunar spacecraft, and one of the primary forces behind their program, rocket engineer Sergei Korolev, died in 1966. This left the Russian space program confused and divided. The Americans quickly overcame the fire tragedy and still managed to move into the breach left by the lack of direction in the Soviet program. On July 16, 1969, 3 astronauts, Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong, blasted off on the most important journey ever taken by humans. The 3 men had been selected for this incredible adventure by lot. Their ship was Apollo 11. The morning was clear and beautiful. The world was listening as T-minus 4 minutes was announced. An enormous crowd of onlookers had been arriving for weeks. They grew deathly silent as liftoff approached.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We are still go at this time. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are armed. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff.
plan was for Apollo 11 to go into orbit around the moon, while Aldrin and Armstrong steered a tiny lunar landing module called the Eagle to the moon's surface. Collins would be back at the orbiting command module, the Columbia. After a short moonwalk, the Eagle would rendezvous with Columbia, and all three astronauts would return to Earth. Things appeared to go like clockwork. Aldrin and Armstrong successfully landed their module at the second choice among landing sites, the huge lunar plain called the Sea of Tranquility. But things were dicey for a time. Armstrong and Aldrin had to maneuver the module around some huge boulders, and they touched down with only about 30 seconds of fuel remaining. Armstrong was about to turn 39. He was a shy, young test pilot from a small town in Ohio. But he made history when he announced to Mission Control in Houston,
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
He quickly took his remarkable deed a step further when he squeezed through the Eagle's forward hatch and stepped down the short ladder. Before leaving the craft, he switched on a television camera, and much of the world watched as he placed his foot on lunar soil. He stopped a moment to look at the module's footpads, which he reported back to Houston were only depressed into the moon's surface about 2 inches. Then he gave the world some of the most memorable words ever to escape the lips of man.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The lunar leap was indeed a giant one. It gave mankind answers to some of the most difficult questions of our time. But it also left us with a clear demonstration of how much is left to learn. The edges of our solar system and deep space still hold incredible mystery. Scientists only recently began to recognize the existence of unexpected deep space objects like quasars, pulsars, and black holes. We now know that quasars are star-like objects that must be many times brighter than entire galaxies. Pulsars are rapidly blinking remnants of supernova explosions. And then there are the mysterious galactic whirlpools called black holes. Some physicists believe these phenomena developed when super-dense stars, some with a mass 10 times that of our sun, began to age and exhaust the nuclear fuel in their core. In their prime, these stars were so dense that their gravity pulled in everything around them. As the stars ran out of fuel, they began to collapse under the weight of their own gravity. That gravitational pull actually drew all their mass and light back to the core of the dying star, and a huge gravitational force field resulted. These black holes are now being recognized by the way they suck sometimes enormous heavenly bodies into their center. We are also left with the mystery of why life as we know it sprang up on a fairly minor blue ball planet orbiting a fairly average star in a typical spiral galaxy. Religious men see a divine hand in Earth's selection as the cradle of life. There might have been a time when scientific men would have sneered at this idea. But the recent past has brought the religious and scientific closer together. There was a time when scientists believed the cosmos was infinite in nature. In fact, the Greek philosopher Aristotle was strongly against the idea of a definite beginning for the universe. He didn't like the implication of divine intervention. He preferred to believe the universe always existed and would continue forever. Until the 1920s, science generally agreed with Aristotle. It was then that scientists found strong proof that the universe is actually expanding. Space is growing. And if you work backward from a growing universe, you come to the clear conclusion there must have been a beginning point. Most scientists now believe that there was actually a point in time that most have labeled a Big Bang, when the beginnings of the universe emerged from nearly nothing. They theorize an incredible inflation of matter when a tiny speck grew 1,000,000,000,000,000,000 times in a fraction of a second. Long before science recognized this, religious men already believed in a dramatic beginning for the universe. The book of Genesis in the Old Testament of the Jewish and Christian religions boldly proclaims that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Who can imagine a bigger bang than that? Men of vision and open minds have always realized that the real beauty of this universe isn't what we know about it, but what we have yet to learn. In the 1600s, Galileo said, "Who should set a limit to the mind of man? Who would dare assert that we know all that is to be known?" The British theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking claims that when he has succeeded in his efforts to combine general relativity and quantum mechanics, he will then know how the universe began. But he admits he still won't know why it began. And so, the mystery continues.
Hanau kumulipo I ka pō, he kāne. Hanau po ele I ka pō, he wahine. Hanau ka uku.
In a Hawaiian creation chant called the Kumulipo, the origin of coral, algae, and fishes is described. After a time of darkness, the coral polyp was the first earth life to emerge, then a coral colony. Eventually, all plants and animals would follow this genesis out of the sea. There are Hawaiian legends and stories of gods and goddesses who live in the ocean and take the form of underwater creatures. Many myths explain why certain fish have stripes or look the way they do, or why they gather in certain places. Powerful protective spirits, or aumakua, watch over and guard human families for generations. Some of these are at home in the surrounding sea. Hawaiian islands are composed of lava that escape the Earth's core through undersea vents. It all started about 70 million years ago. As the ocean floor moves slowly in a northwest direction, the center of activity forms new islands, while the older ones are chiseled by wind, rain, and the sea. The coral colonies begin to grow within 25 years on new lava flows and slowly establish fringing reefs. These subtropical Hawaiian reefs are some of the most beautiful in the world, comprised of thousands of species of fish, mollusks, and other plants and animals. It's here that we'll take you to this unfamiliar world, to the ancient land of Hawaii that few have seen before. The urge to explore the undersea realm began thousands of years ago, when man thought it was inhabited by monsters. As time went on, all sorts of devices were concocted to plummet the ocean depths. Imagination ran wild, and pioneers like Jules Verne created machines and heroes of fancy that actually lived 20,000 leagues under the sea. But maybe this isn't so absurd after all. Science has almost caught up with fiction. In just a century, submarine technology has advanced to a point where we can remain submerged hundreds of feet for weeks at a time. Each year, the possibilities increase, bringing Captain Nemo's ultimate diving machine closer to reality. At the forefront of submersible technology, Atlantis Submarines discovered a new and very refreshing concept: passenger-carrying subs that take peaceful and inobtrusive tours to the rich reef zones, where visitors can comfortably witness firsthand the undersea environment. This is the story of Atlantis, the first passenger submersible in the world. The Big Island of Hawaii is the largest and youngest island in the Hawaiian archipelago. Molten lava still pours into the sea. It's a battle between the forces of fire and water that eventually the ocean will win. On Kona's western or sheltered coast, reef-building corals have begun to colonize over a network of lava flows. This was the first Hawaiian reef Atlantis submarines would explore. Arriving in 1988, they received a warm aloha and have been at home ever since. This area of Kona has many wahipana, what Hawaiians call storied places. On the shuttle ride out to the submarine, the historic Kona coastline can be seen resting on the long slopes of Mauna Loa, the most massive mountain on Earth. Atlantis lies waiting to take these passengers on a tour they'll never forget. Air-conditioned comfort, the 48-passenger, 65-foot sub travels in an area where gardens of coral are already visible through the individual viewports, 13 on each side. Maintaining a speed of about 1 knot through this shallow expanse, the young reef and its inhabitants are introduced. The pilot's front viewing window is over 4 feet in diameter. Pilots for Atlantis are specially trained to operate this DC battery-powered electric submarine, a marvel of technology. There are 2 stern thrusters, 2 vertical thrusters, and 1 at the bow for careful maneuvering. Above water, the support boat pilot keeps watch and constant contact with the sub, and divers prepare to put on a show underwater. As the Atlantis sub moves out to meet the divers, shoals of fish move in all directions, illuminated by the sun. A safe distance is maintained above the delicate corals so as not to damage the living creatures there. Reefs grow only about an inch a year. The pilot and co-pilot monitor the distance from the bottom at all times. The divers arrive. They can only stay down 10 minutes at a time at this depth of about 85 feet. The fish that immediately surround them are common in all Hawaiian waters. Schools of surgeonfish called palani and pu'alu have razor-sharp blades near the end of their tails. Humuhumu ele are the ones that seem to flap wings through the water. These are triggerfish or black durgeon. The black and white striped fish are Hawaiian sergeant majors, or mamo, a kind of damselfish. And the yellow school is blue-striped snapper, or ta'ape, an introduced fish from Tahiti. Now in great abundance, they're seen on every dive. When it comes to food, they're not very shy. Small millet seed butterfly fish, or lauvilivili, make a more timid approach. There's a rhythm down here that has nothing to do with the world above, an interaction based on hunger and curiosity. Carefully selected examples of reef life are gathered to show close up to the passengers, like this small sea urchin. It's respectfully placed back on the reef in its own little niche. A Triton's trumpet is brought to the viewports. This shell was called pupuhi and was fashioned into musical instruments. The divers' 10 minutes are not complete without showing off. They don't leave the scene until everyone's had some laughs. There are 44 species of coral in Hawaiian waters. Small animals live within the polyps and feed on plankton drifting in the water. Their hard skeletons form limestone, the only organically made rock in the world. Sand is continually made through erosion of shells and coral and from the digested matter of coral-eating fish. One adult parrotfish, or uhu, can produce up to 1 ton of sand a year by munching on the reef and eliminating the waste matter. The coral gardens support a bounty of life. Tiny particles of plankton floating in the ocean become food for reef fishes. These surgeonfish are vegetarians and feed on debris and algae on the sandy bottom. Smaller reef fish stay close to their coral homes, and each has a role to play in this balanced ecosystem. There's a logic to the dance of aggression and survival. 25% of Hawaii's fish are endemic or found only in these waters. Isolated from other land masses for so long, they have evolved unique characteristics. These yellow tangs were called lau'ipala in Hawaiian. They're eating small particles of algae in the coral. The similar-looking black gold ring variety is called kole. All butterfly fish were called kikakapu. The ornate butterflies swim in pairs like most of the other 22 species in island waters. The raccoon butterfly fish is one of the most flamboyant. Hawaiians were inspired to be more descriptive with the long-nosed butterfly fish, the lauvilivili nukunuku oi oi, meaning the little fish with a long nose shaped like a vilivili leaf. Many fish species change color and sex during their life cycles. Often a male, female, and juvenile look entirely different. Wrasses are the most versatile and striking of the color changers. One of the most enchanting fish on the reef is the Moorish idol, or kihi-kihi. They search the vicinity for sponges to eat. Moray eels hide out in their adopted holes, brilliantly camouflaged. An octopus, or he'e, peers out of a crevice. A stranger inhabitant of the reef is the trumpet fish. These predators can change color to match their environment for a better disguise. Their mouths are designed to vacuum in unsuspecting prey. They can turn yellow when lau'ipala are nearby. Pufferfish resemble something from another planet. This spotted puffer is a slightly different species called o'opu hu'e. O'opu means stomach in Hawaiian. As a defense mechanism, puffers blow up like a balloon when agitated. All of these species can be clearly seen from the Atlantis viewports, a world witnessed before only by divers. Sometimes larger predators appear in deeper water. This is a rare view of the white-tipped reef shark. Sharks, or mano, play a large part in Hawaiian myth and folklore, said to save or protect their human families. Graceful manta rays glide over the sand, their wingspan sometimes reaching 20 feet. After a 50-minute tour, so much more is known about this underwater world that changes every day. The sub lands briefly in a sandbank about 85 feet down and prepares for a signal to surface. As inobtrusively as it appeared, the Atlantis sub leaves the coral wilderness as it was. More than 2 million people have journeyed on Atlantis subs somewhere the world over since 1985. At a cost of $3.5 million, each sub is flawlessly designed and built to the highest standards. thoroughly inspected and certified for 150-foot dives. Atlantis has a home in 7 other locations, including the Caribbean, Mexico, and Guam. But it was a natural choice to come to Hawaii to reveal some of the glories of its unique underwater environment. The island of Maui was formed by the activity of 2 volcanoes. Haleakala, or House of the Sun, is the youngest. The older volcano is composed of deeply eroded cliffs and lush valleys, forming the West Maui Mountains. A partial fringing reef has had time to establish itself off of Maui's protected shorelines. A shallow shelf connects the islands of Maui, Molokai, Lanai, and Kaho'olawe, having all been one island before the sea level dropped thousands of years ago. Endangered humpback whales find this particularly inviting and visit every winter to mate and give birth in these warmer waters. The Maui Atlantis tour out of Lahaina Harbor is special because the submarine will journey to the deepest it can go, 150 feet. It's a 2-mile shuttle trip out to the boarding site with a spectacular view. Atlantis slowly descends into deep blue liquid space. She will submerge about 95 feet to a region of thriving coral growth. The pilot gently maneuvers the 80-ton sub through the O'o Channel. It's some of the most beautiful diving in Hawaii, with scattered coral outcrops extending all the way to Lanai. Prominent schools of ta'ape, black durgeon, and surgeonfish patrol the reef. This protruding colony of coral is nicknamed the Hobbit Hilton by the Atlantis staff because it presents an entire condominium full of residents. A massive coral settlement like this is home and sanctuary for many varieties of fish and plant life. They might gather at the station of the local cleaner wrasse, a splendidly colored fish whose job it is to clean parasites and debris off of other fish's skin. The interdependence of creatures here may involve many relationships unknown to us. It's just a brief passage into a world that existed long before we were able to witness it. Here is where small trees of black coral bloom. Hawaiians named it Ikahaku Mo'ana and used it as a medicine in ancient times. Atlantis dives deeper to a range of lava ledges and caverns. Atlantis ventures into the territory of the pyramid butterfly fish that linger around coral trees, protecting their property by flashing a bright white spot at intruders. From the outside, a cavern looks foreboding, armored by a forest of coral trees. Once inside, it's as if the trees are decorated with bright, colorful ornaments. Long-nosed butterfly fish, the lau vili vili nuku nuku oi oi, feed on small crustaceans and coral algae in hard-to-reach places. Upside down, they comb the roof of the cavern, where another type of coral algae is a crimson color. The long-nosed hawkfish is only found near black coral. It keeps a sharp lookout for tiny crustaceans and worms that prosper in the branches. Along the outside ledge, a reddish sponge thrives, and numerous forms of life find a dwelling place. As Atlantis reaches the rim of the old lava ledge, large schools of ta'ape come into view, drifting and swirling on the current. This is the deepest that the sub goes, 150 feet down. Here, ancient lava walls form an undersea mountain range. After a 50-minute dream-like journey, the pilot travels to the area of surfacing. At this maximum depth, a whaling anchor about 140 years old lies on the sandy bottom, a deserted relic of Lahaina's history. Again, Atlantis awaits the signal for the 2 to 3 minute ascent to the top. Pressurized air fills her ballast tanks, and vertical thrusters lift her toward the sky. Atlantis Submarines also tours Oahu with an entirely different focus. Here, you have to dig a little deeper under the surface. Deeper underground, because all of the plains beneath Honolulu are limestone, a huge remnant of compressed and solidified coral. It formed over 100,000 years ago when the area was underwater and coral built itself over the lava flows. Oahu, like Maui, is also formed by 2 volcanoes, now eroded into long ridgelines. A partial fringing reef flourishes in certain protected areas. Besides being the most famous beach in the world, Waikiki is the most visited area in the state, receiving 75% of the 6.5 million tourists a year. At one time, it was a network of rich wetland taro and royal fish ponds. But through the course of time, the coastal environment was altered to accommodate development. The natural reef was dredged, and sand was brought in to create more beach area. That's why Atlantis decided to create artificial reef structures off the coast of Waikiki to join in a research effort to discover how an area can be replenished and how long it takes. The Waikiki Submarine Tour is a lesson in ecology as well as another fun and exciting introduction to Hawaiian reef life. The tour off Waikiki descends to a depth of about 85 feet to the first artificial reef structure. Schools of opelu, or mackerel, hover near the surface. These ladder-like constructions weigh about 27 tons and are part of a University of Hawaii research project in partnership with Atlantis Hawaii. It has attracted a huge variety of familiar fishes and supporting plant and animal organisms. The surfaces are encrusted with new plant and animal life, a garden tended by these plankton-eating fishes. These small openings provide shelter for residents from predators and strong currents. Preliminary testing has shown that the marine life in the Atlantis Reef area has multiplied about 3,000 times since inception. The next experimental reef structure was designed and fabricated in the city of Asahi, Japan. In this manner, the Japanese cultivate nutritious seaweed for sushi and other fine foods. It's made of fiberglass and weighs about 25 tons. Not to be mistaken for Moorish idols, these black and white striped pennant fish seem to match the delicate rings of the Asahi Reef. And the Lauvilivili also have adopted this as their private feeding ground. Traveling down to about 110 feet, the sub continues its underwater flight to the deepest artificial reef. a Mitsubishi YS-11 airplane was placed here and opened up to allow shelter and plenty of room for fish. Damselfish have claimed part of it as an egg-laying site and will energetically defend their patch of algae. But the best part of the show lies silent a short distance away. The sunken Navy oil tanker YO-257, a veteran of 3 wars, is Hawaii's largest shipwreck. It was built 50 years ago. Who would have thought it would end up providing life to thousands of sea creatures off the coast of Waikiki? Coral and encrusting algae growths have sprouted up from the decks. Large holes were cut so the fish could maneuver around inside and find privacy or refuge. It's one of the highlights of daily scuba diving tours. This is Ernie. Ernie has moved into an old pipe and can always be found here, keeping watch over the whole parade. The population of ocean citizens here is amazing, considering how short a time it took to colonize the ship. It's different every day, but you can always count on the schools of Ta'ape and, of course, Ernie. That's another one of the Atlantis subs in Waikiki, viewing the wreckage from the other side. The pilot heads for the surfacing area now, near the lava flow called Pali'opono, or Ridge of Life. The Atlantis adventure is not only beautiful, but teaches a valuable lesson about conservation of our precious Hawaiian reefs and marine life resources.
Malama Aina.
Malama Aina. Care for the land, or Aina, and it will care for you. The Aina for Hawaiians extends all the way from the mountain to the seafloor. Lokahi. Unity, balance, and harmony with nature. Mana o i'o. A respect for the things of nature and the true spirit or mana they have.
Aloha Aina.
Aloha Aina, the love of this land.
No laila, pono no kako e aloha ai malama I ia Aina nei.
These images might remain in your dreams long after you've left. You will remember the softness and mystery, the rhythm and spirit of Hawaii beneath the surface.